Welcome into this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got a pretty good program lined up for you today. As always, our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez is going to be joining us in just a few moments with her guest Kathleen Bush-Joseph of the Immigration Policy Institute to talk about several different topics regarding immigration, including the court backlog and some of the costs associated with everything that happens in the immigration process. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation coming up in just a few moments. But as always, we're going to start today by taking a look at what's happening and what's trending across the border. Starting with, after nearly 2 months of waiting, Democrat Adelita Grijalva is now officially a member of the U.S. House representing the state of Arizona. Grijalva was sworn into office Wednesday, more than 7 weeks after she won a special election to fill the House seat last held by her late father.
Will Representative-elect Grijalva and members of the Arizona delegation present themselves in the well? And all members will rise. And the representative-elect will raise her right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which you are about to enter, so help you God?
I do.
Congratulations, you're now a member of the United States Congress.
Now, her swearing in was one of Speaker of the House Mike Johnson's first actions before Congress voted to end the government shutdown. In a speech on the floor after being sworn in, Grijalva said it was time for Congress to, quote, restore a full and check and balance to this administration, and that we can and must do better. What is most concerning is not what this administration has done, but what the majority of this body has failed to do, she said. Johnson had refused to seat Grijalva while the chamber was out of session, a decision that prompted condemnation from Grijalva. It also brought a lawsuit from Arizona's Attorney General and speculation that Johnson was delaying her induction to stall a vote on whether to require the Justice Department release documents related to the late convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. When she took office, Grijalva became the last signature needed on a discharge petition, which will force action on efforts to release files related to Epstein.
Will Representative-elect
I will sign the discharge petition right now to release the Epstein files.
On Wednesday, House Oversight Committee Democrats released emails that the sex offender wrote alleging that President Trump, quote unquote, of course, knew about his relationship with underage girls. Now, while Arizona's Hispanic population makes up a third of the state and women make up half of the population, Grijalva is the state's first Latina congresswoman. She won a special election in September to take over her father's seat. Congressman Raul Grijalva died in March after complications from cancer treatments. He served Arizona in the U.S. House for more than 2 decades. And we recently spoke with Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com about his relationship with the former congressman, or the late congressman, I should say. And if you'd like to hear more about what Raul Grijalva was like before he passed away while he was working in the House, you can find that on borderreport.com. A week after her shocking arrest, a daycare teacher arrested by ICE in Chicago has been released from custody. Diana Santillana Galleno was detained on November 5th by federal agents, had been detained by federal agents at her workplace, Rayito del Sol Spanish Immersion Early Learning Center. Video last week showed 2 masked federal agents in plain clothes and wearing vests labeled police inside the school and daycare. She was heard screaming through glass doors as the agents wrestled her, at one point picking her up. Agents slammed the woman face first into the outer door as they pushed her outside. Her arrest shocked parents who were leaving their children at the daycare. DHS officials say she was arrested inside a vestibule and not in the school, and that no arrests were made in front of children. And one last story to tell you about this afternoon. A federal judge in Chicago also ordered the release of roughly 600 people detained amid federal immigration raids across the city. Judge Jeffrey Cummings announced plans to release hundreds arrested during Operation Midway Blitz. That is the Trump administration's immigration deportation operation to remove undocumented migrants from the country. The judge's ruling said the hundreds detained violate a consent decree prohibiting arrests without a warrant, and that they must be set free by Monday.
This whole operation, for the last 2 months, the terrorizing of our neighborhoods, the brutalizing of people here, has all been unlawful. That's what it's going to show. It's going to show that all of this, all of the tactics of Mr. Bavino, all of the tactics of ICE have been unlawful in the vast, vast majority of arrests.
Now, in all, nearly 3,400 people have been arrested in the Chicago area. Time now to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, as well as our guest for today's program, Miss Kathleen Bush-Joseph of the Migration Policy Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
Rudy, thanks for kicking us off here. Kathleen, you are an immigration policy analyst with Migration Policy Institute. You had a new report come out today that says U.S. immigration courts are dysfunctional. How dysfunctional are U.S. immigration courts?
Thank you, Sandra. The U.S. immigration courts have really been in a crisis for decades now. They have been struggling to keep up with the number of cases that have been filed, and there's simply not enough judges to handle all of them, but it's really reached a crescendo, and now the courts have 3.8 million pending deportation cases, far more than judges are able to work through.
And I noticed in the report, it's saying that it can take 4 years to get through the courts, and final decisions can take longer if they're being appealed. So, I mean, why is it taking so long? Is we just don't have enough judges? The cases are more complicated. Walk us through this.
It's all of the above. So the Biden administration tried to hire the maximum number of judges allowed by Congress, and the judges did complete a record number of cases last year, more than 700,000. But at the same time, far more cases were filed, and those were from recent border crossers. Of course, you're familiar with all of the people trying to come to the US-Mexico border, and many of them being released into the country. Many of them went on to apply for asylum. And last year, there were more than 900,000 asylum applications filed at the courts.
Wow.
Those are more complex cases, so it's harder for judges to work through those quickly.
So let's unpack this a little bit. Explain the U.S. immigration court system, because it's under the Department of Justice. It's different from other courts. Explain it to the viewer, the listener, who's really not familiar with this.
This is an important point because the immigration courts are not like the federal courts. They're not independent. So the immigration courts actually sit under the Department of Justice. And that means that when there's a new administration, that administration can change the priorities of the courts. And the executive branch also controls whether or not the immigration judges can keep their jobs. So there's speculation that the judges feel under pressure to be denying more cases under the second Trump administration, for example.
And the immigration judges are actually under the Executive Office for Immigration Review, EOIR, right? And if someone appeals it, it goes to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the Board of Immigration Appeals also faces a record high backlog of appeals. And some of this relates to the quality of the decisions and lack of representation. When people aren't feeling like they're getting a fair shake in court, they're trying to appeal that decision. And then they can actually even appeal further onto the federal courts out of that system as well.
So 4 years plus to decide, resolve these cases, which, people's lives, families hanging in the balance. The report says these delays, quote, undermine the goals of U.S. asylum and immigration enforcement systems. What do you mean by that? Cost the country money?
No, it's really a lot of these things coming together. So when we think about border security and trying to manage who is coming, in a lot of ways, the dysfunction at the immigration court system has contributed. And so there's all of this money that goes to immigration and customs enforcement and then customs and border protection. So those enforcement agencies get billions and billions of dollars. And at the same time, the immigration courts that are charged with handling the cases and actually ordering people removed have received a fraction of that money, only about 2% of the enforcement agencies' budgets. So that means that you have all of this front end enforcement, but when it comes to adjudicating people's cases, that takes years and years. And that can incentivize people to file perhaps weaker claims, but it also means that people who actually merit protection are not receiving it. So the system is not working as a whole.
I saw that in the report. It mentioned this figure, 2% of the total combined budget for CBP and ICE was EOIR's budget. That's just a shocking small fraction, compared to how much money is spent on enforcement. It said in fiscal year 2024, EOIR's budget was cut by $16 million. How can you be cutting a budget when you have an increase in backlog of cases? This doesn't seem to make sense.
And that really is the question. And I think here we should talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which many people may know provided a lot of money, $170 billion for ICE and Customs and Border Protection. But what the bill actually did was cap the number of judges who could serve at the immigration courts at 800. And so even though there's all of this money going to the enforcement system, if the courts aren't able to keep up, this dysfunction could continue. And analysts have actually predicted that it would take hundreds and hundreds more judges to be working through the backlog over the course of a decade.
We're speaking with Kathleen Bush-Joseph of the Migration Policy Institute. We're going to take a very quick break, but we're going to continue the conversation right after that break. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. Back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, joined today by South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez, and our guest for today's program, Kathleen Bush-Joseph of the Migration Policy Institute.
Kathleen, right before the break, you were explaining that there are about 800 immigration judges. That's what it's capped at, but many more are needed. I was reading the report said about 1,300 immigration judges at least are needed. And there are only 17 appellate judges nationwide. Is that correct?
That's right. And one of the things that the Trump administration has done that could exacerbate the existing backlogs is they've fired a number of judges, and then a number of judges have also taken early retirement or buyouts or been transferred. So in total, at least 139 judges have left the courts since January 2025. So there could be some 600 immigration judges having to deal with these millions of cases right now.
So we're really going down in numbers. We're not at 800. We're lower. We're about 600, correct? We're kind of at a minus right now. And what about using the 600 military lawyers, the judge advocate generals, on a temporary basis? What does the report say about how effective they might be, and would they have the proper training to do this really complicated type of immigration law?
Yeah, so there are questions about whether or not the military lawyers are receiving adequate training to be hearing these complex asylum cases and making these kinds of life or death decisions that can result from people's claims for protection and from orders of removal. But there's also the question about if the plan is even legal, because the military is not supposed to be involved in domestic law enforcement affairs. And so members of Congress have actually written letters to the Trump administration asking about the legality of this plan and what kind of analysis has been done. And I'll just add here that, it would really be helpful for the judges to be hired on a permanent basis, trained up, and for there to be the long-term investments in the court's infrastructure to be trying to tackle these issues long-term.
One other thing that really surprised me, the report says that it recommends that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services asylum officers be the one to decide many of these cases. There's been a lot of criticism of using people other than immigration judges to decide these, complicated cases. People's lives hang in the balance. But this report, Migration Policy Institute, says you believe it should. Why?
Right. So we are saying that immigration judges should be hearing serious cases, ones involving national security threats, public safety threats, where someone has an interaction with law enforcement and they might have a criminal charge or conviction, for example. Now, these U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service asylum officers who you're mentioning, they're trained in hearing asylum cases, and they specialize in that area of law. They actually hear the asylum cases of people who are already in the country. So if someone overstays a visa, for example, it's these asylum officers who would be hearing those cases. And what we're saying is that the cases that are not a priority because they don't pose these security threats, they should go to the asylum officers who can hear them more quickly in a non-adversarial process.
So if what I'm hearing you say is that these officers, since they are qualified and they typically hear cases from those who are living already in the country, they should take on the cases of those who are crossing. And in the case of the Biden administration, we saw thousands of people per day. So you're saying that might have helped to eliminate some of the backlog that is resulting in now.
That's right. And the Biden administration actually did put forward a proposal to do this, but it didn't fully implement this plan, partly because of the lack of resources. So again, this comes back to there needs to be more money to hire judges, but there also needs to be money for hiring more asylum officers. They were really overwhelmed. And currently at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, there are another 1.5 million cases pending. So they have their own backlog that they need to be working through. And this is why we're saying that these parts of the system that are not at the border itself really need to be looked at in such a way that the whole system works together.
Earlier, you made a reference to legal representation, so I kind of wanted to talk about that. The report also suggests increasing legal representation for immigration cases. Coincidentally, on yesterday's show, we talked about Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton suing Harris County, which includes Houston, for giving money to nonprofits that provide pro bono legal representation to immigrants going to court. But you're saying that it should be increased, and why? What's the importance of the legal representation there?
Yeah, so I'll say that this is a really major problem, and it undermines the credibility of the system when people's due process isn't being upheld and when cases aren't moving efficiently. And what research has consistently shown is that when people have legal advice or representation, that they know what their rights are and that they are better informed as they move through the court process. That saves immigration judges time, and immigration judges are on the record saying that they appreciate when people have that counsel because it essentially assists them with their heavy workload. And so with legal representation, the facts are that as of last year, there were 2.4 million cases where people did not have an attorney. And it would take a lot of money to be upping legal advice for all of them. The Trump administration halted contracts for a lot of different legal service providers. But what we've seen is that different states, municipalities, and even local governments are stepping up to provide funds for people facing deportation proceedings.
So let's talk solutions, because we've whined and talked a lot about the problem, right? And in the report, it does talk about some solutions. Interestingly, technology, case information online, and electronic court communication. Do the immigration courts not provide this electronic information? I mean, what's going on there?
Yeah, the way that I like to put it is that we are in the 21st century, but unfortunately, the courts are not in some respects.
Wow.
So the courts made a lot of progress during the pandemic, and they were hearing more cases online out of necessity, really. But when we're talking about all of these people not having attorneys, the way that the court systems are designed now, it's such that people who don't have representation are not able to be doing filings online. They're not receiving case communications electronically. And so what we're proposing really, I think sounds common sense, which is that the court should be able to email people or text them and say when there are upcoming court cases, or when they need to be submitting information, deadlines, what have you. All of that would go towards increasing appearances at court, because sometimes people don't know that they actually have a case against them because they haven't received the information.
Wait a minute. So we've had immigration lawyers on the show who have actually lamented the fact that there's so much electronic communication to them. They don't really get FaceTime in court, which can allow them to maybe negotiate in person on behalf of their clients. But you're saying the migrants themselves, if they don't have representation, they are not getting this communication at all. Where's it going?
It's a major problem. So the court will send out mailed notices, but sometimes the court doesn't have the correct addresses. If we think back to when border agents were overwhelmed and many people were being released into the country, a lot of times people didn't have a stable address to give then. So wherever they've ended up, maybe they've moved across the country, being able to update your contact information with the court alone electronically would be a step in the right direction.
Do you have an estimate on how much money should be spent to accomplish and get this technology up to speed?
We don't have a concrete estimate here, and thinking holistically about what the courts would need, it's not just about communication. They have paper files still, and those are needing to be scanned in so that judges can see them, so that the clerks can be working with them. So there are all of these different components here, but modernizing and bringing the system up to date is going to be really important moving forward.
That's really interesting in this era of AI that we're hearing every day, new technology that's taking over our world. They need to scan in their paper files. So that's very enlightening. Kathleen, thanks so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathleen. We appreciate you being here today. Kathleen Bush-Joseph of the Migration Policy Institute. Today, we appreciate her time. And it's, again, one of these, I feel like this needs to be a series with you, because the immigration court system is just so convoluted.
It is.
Rivals only the tax code. So, yeah, we hopefully we can have you on in the future to talk a little bit further into this.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. If you missed our conversation with Kathleen Bush Joseph of the Migration Policy Institute, well, don't forget that you can always stay informed on the story shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while you're on your commute home. Maybe you're out for a jog, or maybe you're taking the dog out for a walk, because Border Report Live brings you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in podcast form. You can catch us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and you can get the audio and video version of our program on the YouTube app. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at Political Power Ranker. It's a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nextstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on data. So make sure to check it out. You can find out more about Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or check your local Nextstar station's website. That is going to do it for us today. For Sandra Sanchez, our South Texas correspondent, my name is Rudy Mideles. We appreciate you being here, and we will see y'all tomorrow.